Just when you might have thought that the Huskers couldn't hit rock bottom any harder, Colorado, Nebraska's mortal enemies, go into TCU's house and shock the college football world by upsetting last season's runner-up in the national championship game. Hit the like button, make sure you guys are subscribed if you're not already, and tell us in the comments, do you have any hope left that the Huskers are going to win this game this upcoming Saturday? Gary, we mentioned in our previous Colorado video where we predicted that the Huskers would win, that they had a much shorter time in camp to get to know each other, gel, and form a cohesive unit. And after 1 week, it seems like they've clearly done a better job preparing in a shorter time than what Nebraska had, as the Huskers couldn't even beat an injured Minnesota team without their best running back Ibrahim and QB Morgan, both of which have gone to the NFL. And it really seemed like Minnesota was just desperately trying to give us that game. Obviously, last year we went through that a lot. This really felt like one of the most winnable games ever that the Huskers have just given right back to the other team. I guess what I'm getting at, Gary, is why do you think that the Huskers are still going to beat Colorado on Saturday?
I don't have the confidence I had. I'm not walking back on it and saying Nebraska's going to lose. Just like kind of a very broad response is that I don't think their game was drastically different from our game in outcome. If TCU can extend that, avoid some of the dumb mistakes, penalties, things like that they did. Just like Nebraska could have won the game if they don't make some of the dumb mistakes and things like that, especially down the stretch. They could have won. The difference is this was a shootout game. It was a more exciting game to watch for most people. Colorado never had that game in a sense of like, it's over. TCU doesn't have a chance, right? But they led most of the game. They looked way better on offense. I'm going to specify on offense than I anticipated they would first game out. I have multiple reasons of why I think that is the case. That obviously doesn't mean nothing, but in my opinion, there's about as much going against TCU that wasn't really brought up and hasn't been mentioned. And that's not to take anything away from Colorado or make excuses for TCU, but from there being absolutely nothing on film for TCU to prepare for Colorado, there wasn't much. But I mean, you could go back to Baylor Temple and find different things on Rule for them to get ready for. You could watch most of our guys from last year to get tape on things like that. Minnesota and Nebraska have played, with a good chunk of the same players the last several years. To me, it's just very different. But there is no denying that Colorado's offense, to me, looked like they had been playing together for 4 or 5 seasons straight. Like they couldn't miss. Their quarterback looks like he'd be a good runner-up for the Heisman, only to his receiver/cornerback. Like they've just got absolute studs. I think it's drastically different for their team when you get into the trenches, and I'm sure we'll get into that type of thing. But I just think that there's going to be a very different look to the game this upcoming Saturday than there was this past Saturday for Colorado.
So you mentioned Shedeur. I don't think we talked about him enough in the last video. I don't think many people knew for sure whether or not he was going to be able to play like that at this level. It's crazy how impressive he was. He makes Jeff Sims as a passer look like Jamal Lord. Shedeur broke Colorado's long record, 500 plus yards, 4 touchdowns through the air. 4 receivers for the Buffaloes had over 100 yards. Meanwhile, the Huskers needed a huge kick return from Ramir Johnson to set up a trick play to get the 1 touchdown that the Huskers were able to muster up. Opposite of Shedeur Sanders, Jeff Sims looks like he needs training wheels in the passing game. And we've got an offensive coordinator that looks like he has no idea how he should be using Jeff Sims. I just cannot see a way in which the Huskers are able to keep up on offense with Colorado. Now, I do think that Nebraska will score more against Colorado than they did Minnesota, but when push comes to shove, I just can't see them converting more points. Like, I guess I've lost faith pretty early, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I really haven't, and it's quite possibly setting me up to look even worse than I probably look now from what I said in our original preview deal, because we were so excited to talk about it. Both teams' opponents, both Colorado's opponent and Nebraska's opponent, are drastically different teams. So if our team played the same style, both sides of the ball, as TCU, and I know a lot of people compared the 3-3-5, that like TCU, it's more like a nickel type 3-3-5, but the nickel's actually a safety, so it's, essentially the same as our 3-3-5 or whatever. We can get into more of that if we want. But there's some similarities there that I'm a little worried about from the too much cushion. Like you brought up that they had 4 guys that had over 100 yards receiving. Their leading receiver yards wise was their running back, and they played that cushion that I was losing my mind about Nebraska doing in the beginning of the Minnesota game, to the point where he was just dumping short passes, especially screens and flare outs from the running back, that he would have had more. That one touchdown, I think the first touchdown of the game he had, they either didn't account for him, or the guy that was supposed to be playing him man or picking him up decided to go at Shador and let him go. I mean, if there was 300 yards of field, he would have gone. So that has me a little worried on the defensive side. Nebraska figuring out how to get to Minnesota's quarterback, I think, will help them earlier on. I don't think Colorado's offensive line is as good as Minnesota's offensive line. TCU is a more explosive, athletic style of an offense than Minnesota is, but Nebraska's also more of a physical and trying to run the ball both with the quarterback and the 3 to 4 running backs than TCU, and TCU ran all over them. If TCU could replay that game, I honestly think they would try to play the possession game and continue to pound the ball. Sanders threw for 510 yards, which is absolutely insane. But at the end of the game, Colorado had 565 total yards of offense. So they had basically no running game. They were obviously pretty one-dimensional. And I think TCU allowed them, not like helped them almost, like their inability to get some kind of a pass rush. I know they had a couple sacks, but the lack of pass rush, the lack of ability to contain the flats in the short field, again, which is what Nebraska had issues with early on with Minnesota, and at certain times later down the stretch as well, there was no reason for them to run. You know, the running back's good. I'm not taking anything away from any of the players. I just think that when you look at what Nebraska wants to do from what we hear they want to do, the big thing that stood out to me watching that Colorado game was Rule saying, and Tony White saying, they want to find teams' weaknesses and press on that, and they want to create as many mismatches as they can. And I'm super happy that Colorado at least got one game on tape. I'm glad we didn't play them the first game, but I still think it would have looked different, because I don't think Nebraska would have tried to go pass for pass with them and get into this air attack or this super spread offense both ways, and it's just real quick back and forth. I think Nebraska's going to try to really run the ball. I think the quarterback run game is going to be there all day long. I think Jeff Sims has a really good chance at redeeming himself, not at all by passing. I think he's in a world of trouble if he tries throwing. Both of those corners are stud. I know Hunter gets all the accolades, and he should. I think he's, if not the best, definitely at the very, very top of all players in college football. Those guys are going to just feast off of him if he doesn't have a drastically different look, you know, like reads, shorter reads, simpler reads, where they just say, we're just, you know, own the possession and pound the ball and keep their offense on the sideline. I think that's what they'll do. I think even though Colorado will probably know that and try to game plan for it, from what I saw today, and to be fair, TCU didn't establish that, or it didn't seem like they were really even trying to establish that. Maybe they look better, maybe they look different, and they can play that game too. You know, the physical ground and pound type game, at least on the defensive end. I just feel way better. You know, TCU, I think, is a false number 17 team, or whatever you want to call it. They returned 11 starters from last year. They lost, I think, like 6 guys to the pros. They lost like 25 other guys between transfer portal and just not being eligible anymore. And those are obviously all over the board. Those aren't 25 starters or key players by any stretch, but some of them were key players. But I mean, you look at, they lost their quarterback, they lost their running back, they lost their best receiver, they lost their best corner, they lost a key offensive lineman, a defensive lineman, all to the NFL. Those are critical positions, right? It's not like a tight end or, you know, your second or third receiver, whatever. You know, Max Duggan was a Heisman finalist, you know, gone, and you're trying to replace him. So it's not, and then again, I think hasn't been brought up a lot, and I don't want this to sound like I'm making excuses for TCU or like Colorado's not that good. If anybody watched that game saw Colorado's offense is absolutely legit, but not having any kind of film or no idea really, and you could look at Jackson State stuff, I guess, because you had him coaching and you had Sanders at quarterback and Travis Hunter was there, but it's just really, really hard to prepare for a team that was thrown together a month ago. And to Colorado's credit, they exploited that. You know, they went all over them. I just feel like TCU didn't make adjustments. I really feel like this upcoming game is going to be a very different style for Colorado, and it's going to be, I think we're going to force them more into playing our style of game than they're going to be able to force us to play theirs, if that makes sense. Now, if we get down big early, you're not going to have a choice but to throw. And if that's the case, I don't think there's a person with common sense in any fan base at all after watching Jeff Sims throw against Minnesota that we're done for. So I think they're really going to try to grind the ball on the time of possession and drag the game out.
I think that's definitely how the Huskers have to play it if they want any shot in hell in beating Colorado. And Coach Prime, I'm putting that respect on his name. Unlike you.
I love how everybody heard what I was saying at the beginning of that and not all the love I gave him and talked about how he was like my idol growing up.
We waited too long till the end of the video to
I guess.
bring that part up. To kind of piggyback off what you're saying, they have to completely scrap the style of game plan that says, we'd like to throw here because we see something. Nah, I hope you don't see it. Because early in this season already, Jeff Sims throwing has the feel of what can go wrong will go wrong, dating all the way back to his time at Georgia Tech where what could go wrong went wrong. I think you have to scrap that style of play calling and go for we've got a Ferrari behind center and we're going to race him and we're going to see if you guys can stop. He's kind of like a four-wheeling Ferrari. He's fast as hell, but he's big and strong. You have to utilize that, not his arm. And running the ball a lot will hopefully keep Shedeur off the field, keep Travis Hunter off the field a little bit more than if you were going out there trying to do the things that you did with Spencer Rattler. I told you earlier, the saddest sentence I'll ever say is Jeff Sims cannot throw the ball as well as Spencer Rattler. Tell us what you guys think, though, in the comments, please. Who's going to win this game? Do you still have faith in the Huskers? We'll probably have a couple more videos before the game, but remember, we will be live streaming the Colorado game, 11 a.m. Central Time. We can't wait to see you guys, but until then, go Big Red.